I get asked all the time on how to make an exhaust tip, so I'm going to show you how to make an exhaust tip by hand. This is going to be a 8-inch exhaust tip to a 5-inch inlet. So we're going to go through almost all the steps on how to do that. Alright, so this exhaust tip is going to be 16 inches long. And since it's getting overlays on it, it has to be a certain length. We'll go over that in a minute. So to start off with, we have a 14 by 26 inch piece of steel. And then we're gonna go in and mark it at 3 1/4 for each spacing. So 3 1/4, 6 1/2, 9 3/4, 13, 16 1/4, 19 1/2, 22 3/4, and then we're going to do that on the top also. So again, 3 1/4, 6 1/2, 9 3/4, 13, 16 1/4, 19 1/2, 22 3/4. Now that we have those marked, so like I said, this is going to be 16 inches long. So the long portion of our exhaust tip is going to be 11 1/4 long to make up for the overlays and leave room for overlays. If you're not doing overlays, this step's really not super important. Or if you're doing longer overlays, shorter overlays, etc. So we're going to measure from the top down, 11 1/4 on both sides. We're going to take a straight edge. We're going to draw a line there. If my straight edge wasn't bent. And we're going to draw lines on our vertical marks. Now, I don't draw all the way down, but you can if you want to. Now that those lines are drawn, mark out our spots for our. So since this exhaust tip is going to be a 5-inch inlet, we are going to find the center of each point here that we measured at the bottom. With a 5-inch inlet, to find what you need to do for your inlet, you need to take the inlet size, so 5.2 times 3.14. That'll give you your number of, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but then you divide that by 8. And that 8 is how wide each section needs to be for that 5-inch inlet. So we're going to go through there, and on a 5-inch inlet, it's about, or a 2-inch portion down here. So that's what we're marking down here from the center. So we're going to mark center, and then inch from each side. Okay, now that we have that marked, we can draw straight lines from this point here up to this point here to here. And we're going to do that on every single one of these. Now that you have those lines marked, you're going to take a piece of exhaust pipe smaller than what your 5-inch is, And the reason for that is if you use a piece of 5" to mark your cutouts, your little semicircles, it's going to leave big gaps in the corners. If you use a piece of 4" it makes those gaps tighter than what that piece of 5" does. So you're going to take a piece of 4". You're going to mark out your circles. Okay, now that we have those marked, those little semicircles down there, you can go ahead and mark the angle of our exhaust tip. So on mine, all my exhaust tips have a 2" cut difference from the top to the bottom. I'm not sure the exact angle on them. So we're gonna go over to our left side, or you can do the right side. It's no big deal really. So we're gonna go over to our left side. We're gonna measure 2 inches down. Then we're gonna go over to the right side, 2 inches down. Mark it. Then we're going to take our straight edge again. We're not drawing a line across the whole thing. We're going to draw a line in this one little 3.25" spacing over here. So we're going to line up our marks. We're going to draw a line just like that on. So just like that, right there. Then we're going to take a straight edge again. We're going to count that one. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 over. And then this top line right here, we're going to draw a straight line there. And I'll show you guys what I mean in a second. And then we're going to go to this 2" mark on the other side. We're going to go from there's this line right here. There's our angle for the exhaust tip, and it stops here. And we're going to go over to this one and draw a straight line from here over to this 2" mark over here. So, like that. So we go from that 2" mark up to the top of this center section here. Like this. So this is that center section, and then this is our lower that we just measured out. And then those lines indicate this angle here. So if you want steeper angles, you can change your measurements around. We're going to cut this all out. You will need a grinder and a cutoff wheel to do this. All right, so now we're going to cut this out. We're going to cut out these triangles down here first, in between each of our reduction sections. So we're going to cut out these triangles here. Now that you have those cut out, you should have something like this. We're going to cut out all of our little semicircles down here. You can either use a cutoff wheel, or sometimes I use a 40 grit flap disc. This takes a little bit longer, but you can get a semicircle, but it just throws less sparks at you. So all you'll do is and you'll end up with something like that. Your little semicircles down here. Like I said, it takes a little bit longer with the flap disc, but really you just get an all-around cleaner semicircle. But what I do is I'll use a cutoff wheel, and then I'll go in and clean it up with the flap disc. So when I use a cutoff wheel, I just I sit here and notch it just enough that I can take a pair of pliers and break them off. And when you have to build as many as I have to build, then this is the quickest way. So then we're going to go up here. We'll clean that up in a minute. We're going to go up here where our angles are, and we're going to cut those out. And then you should end up with something like this. You have your center portion still here, which is the top of your tip, and then you have your angles down, and then your bottom of your tip over here. So now we're just going to go through. We're going to take a flat disc and clean up all of the edges here so we don't snag our fingers on anything. Now that we have that, we're going to get our bender out here. And really, you can start bending it wherever you want to. I always start about the third one down. You're going to line up your bender on the marks. Slide it in there. Line up your marks. Try to split the mark halfway to get the best result. And then you're going to bend it 45 degrees up. I have my bender marked where 45 degrees is. Otherwise, you can use an angle finder, and you'll just have to check every angle after you bend it. So we're going to bend that up, and we're going to do that with every single mark. And we're going to pull it out, flip it, so that way when we bend it, there's just this one seam down here. Then you're going to end up with something like this. You're going to sit one seam down here. We're going to take a flat disc again. We're going to clean up these edges here to get rid of some of this mill scale. I also wipe stuff down with isopropyl alcohol first to get rid of any types of oils on them, which will help with porosity when we go to weld this. Now that we have that cleaned up, I'm just going to make sure everything lines up good over here. Everything's looking good. So we're going to get it on, turn your gas on. Make sure you have your welding helmet. Hook your ground up. Set your welder. Every welder is different. My welder is set at 135 wire speed and 16 volts. So we're just going to line everything up. Tack it in place. And I use that line that's on the inside from where we marked everything out as a reference to make sure it lines up with each other. So now that we verified that it lines up with each other, we're going to throw a few more tacks on here, and then we're going to weld this up. And all those tacks are doing is they're going to keep this from warping. There's a little 1-inch space left back here. And when we do it, we want to make sure we stop right where those two pieces intersect. So that way when we bend it, it doesn't give us any problems. Now that we verified that it stops right where our line is, we can go ahead and start bending these in to get our reducer to our inlet. The best way to do it is a hammer. I usually use a rubber mallet because it's a softer blow and it doesn't echo as bad in my shop. So we're going to start on the opposite end that we did this, so that way we don't burn ourselves. We're going to bend all these in first to see if it all lines up right. Sometimes you have to maneuver your bend some, because like my bender, it doesn't bend 100% perfect from one end to another. So sometimes I have to use the hammer and tap down on a corner to get that corner to fold out some, well, reduce some, to get my angle right. We're going to skip those two since they're still hot. When metal's hot, it bends differently, obviously. I see where I welded it, this angle became a little steeper from all the heat transfer. So all we're going to do is we're going to take our hammer and hit it right here on this weld bead to get this angle to reduce some. Now that we have that, we can persuade it a little more when we go to tack everything together. Now that our inlet is tacked together, we're just going to make sure, we're going to take our piece of 5" and make sure we have even gaps all the way around. Which we do. The 5" is going to be smaller than this hole because we're building this inlet to slide over 5". Now that we have that, we're going to get a piece of steel. I'm going to wipe it down with some isopropyl alcohol just to get any oils off of it. Take my yardstick. I'm going to go 1/4 inch away from the edge here of this piece of steel because I like my inlets about 2 inches long. We're going to straight line it. And then for a 5" inlet, you want your piece of steel to be 16 inches long. So go mark 16. Or you can buy pre-made inlets. It's not anything major here. I just roll my own. We're going to cut out this 16-inch piece that we just measured out. So here we have, I think these are 1 3/4 to be honest, 1 7/8. We have our 1 7/8 by 16-inch piece that we're going to roll into our inlet for the exhaust tip. So I use a piece of 4" to roll them. I don't have a roller, but I use the 4" because if you use the 5" to roll, you get really bad flat spots on where you tacked it to the piece of steel to roll it. So I use a piece of 4" because it creates a tighter circle, and then after you create that tighter circle, you can maneuver it easier and make sure it's the shape you need. So we're going to tack this on here. And then once you get it where it fits, you can bring it to your exhaust tip. I always put the seam at the bottom, and the exhaust tip will also help you make sure it's round. Put the seam at the bottom here. We're going to tack it. And then we're just going to make sure it's even all the way around and where it needs to be. Now that we have 2 tacks on it, I'm just going around to make sure it is even all the way around. Those tacks just help you hold it in place. And I always just triple check myself just to be 100% sure. Now that it is even all the way around, I'm going to go ahead and put a tack on each of these corners. We're going to go through and weld all of these first. And also, I take a hammer up where they bent, and I tap them down. So that way our gap's even all the way down. Now that we have that, we're going to clean it up again, just so that way we have bare steel to work with. Now on these portions, I turned my welder down some. Sorry, my phone stands J. I turned my welder down to about 15. About 120 wire speed. Just because these are open gaps, they're about a 1/16 inch. So that way if we turn our welder down, it doesn't allow burn through as easy. It can still happen, but just not as easy. So we're going to go through and weld these 8 corners here. And if you want to make sure you're getting a good weld, you can look on the inside and make sure that it is bleeding through, as I call it. Now you can TIG weld these if you would like. I do not have my TIG welder set up, so that is out of the option for me. Now that we have all those welded, I'll move my ground out of the way. We're going to put our 40 grit flat disc on, and we're going to grind down these welds smooth. Now that we have those ground smoothly, we just want them. There's currently still an edge on them, like there's a point. We will address that in a minute. Just go through, make sure you don't have any porosity, especially if you're using hot rolled steel. It is really hard to not get porosity on hot rolled steel. I have a little porosity there and one there, and we'll fix that in a minute. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and clean up this edge here, and then clean up in here, so that way we can go ahead and weld it around, and then we'll go through, address our porosity and how to round off these edges. Now I'm going to use about the same settings as I did to weld these to weld all this, because I always leave a small gap around here, so that way you can kind of burn it in a little cold, so that way you're not burning through your inlet and causing a problem for yourself. And always make sure you're comfortable welding, especially on the parts that you want to look the best, so that way you can have a nice and steady hand. We're going to move the isopropyl alcohol so we don't catch this on fire here. I always start at this same weld edge here. Now each point is going to be a stop point. Now that we have that welded, we're going to address our pinholes. So you can either turn the heat up real high and burn them out, or you can do like what I do. I take a cut-off wheel and I just kind of notch it out. Then we're going to put a weld back on that. We're going to put our flat disc back on here. 40 grit to clean off that bead we laid on the little pinhole. Alright, now that we have that addressed here, we're going to get our 120 grit flat disc. I use the 120 grit because it's less abrasive to clean up all of this. So we're going to take our 120 grit and we're just going to kind of like do sweeping motions up and down to round off these corners. So our corners are rough rounded off. Now they're smooth across it. We're gonna go ahead and clean this bead off here. And the reason I just do it this way is because I like to focus on this end only at one time. And if there ends up being a pinhole up here, we'll just flip the welder back on and fix it. Now when you're grinding these long areas down, you want to keep your grind as smooth as possible all the way throughout, so that way you don't get any waviness to it. Now that we got that ground down, we're going to put our 120 grit back on. We're just going to smooth this corner out too in the same sweeping motion. Now that we have all of it roughed in, this is completely up to you. You can either drill holes to mount it with bolts, or I put slits all the way around. I put 4 slits, and one here, one here, one here, and one here. So that way they can use exhaust clamps instead. All I do to do those is I take the cutoff wheel. I have it where when you're cutting, it'll leave a burr on the outside of the inlet, so that way it's easier to clean off. Otherwise, you can just use a pocket knife or something to scrape it off. So now that all the importance done, we got our slits cut around it. We have everything roughed in. We're going to get our sander. We're going to put a piece of 120 or 220 on it. We're going to finish off all these edges. What that sander does is it leaves a nice, smooth, gouge-free reduction to your inlet. Now we can go with powder coat. You can paint it, whatever you want to do.